And welcome back once again to the adventures of the monk and the monarch. As always, you have me, the monarch, and my co-host, Mildra the monk.
Hello.
Now, this time we're going to be talking Saban Entertainment. However, I would like to note that the more I looked into it, I think this is an episode themed after Saban, the founder. Because I realize we're going to need to talk a fair bit about what he did prior to Saban Entertainment.
This is going to be a before, during, and after. A lot of it does tie into Haim Saban and Shuki Levy. If we're going to bring up one, we got to bring up the other.
Yeah. Shuki Levy, like, his anime presence is largely just tied to Saban Entertainment. And outside of that, he was mostly just an Italian musician. I believe it was Italian.
Well, on the music side of things, we will get to that.
Yeah. I think most people are going to kind of recognize Saban Entertainment for bringing over Power Rangers.
That is going to be the big one, but also pretty much half of the output during the Fox Kids / Fox Family era was directly or indirectly tied to Saban. And the gold coin logo and later on the all the world logo logos that they had in the 90s and early 2000s. Yeah, and you and I keep coming back to the early 2000s in these things.
Yeah.
I will state for the record, and I've mentioned this in the past as far as anime goes and other aspects of pop culture, and I'm not saying this out of nostalgia. I do consider that point in history to be significantly underrated by a lot of pundits when it comes to geek culture and in general even historians. Like, you see a lot of people glaze the 80s or the 90s. The early 2000s, when it comes to anime, I feel people disrespect it.
Like, there's definitely the standout people will praise to this day. You know, your Bebops, Trigun, Satoshi Kon did a lot of stuff during that time.
But I've talked about this on my own channel when we did that whole episode about Toonami and how, with a couple exceptions, that first generation of Toonami originals were treated as cast-offs in Japan.
But yeah, that said, I start with Power Rangers just, to kind of establish who Saban Entertainment was.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, that's what's instantly going to come to mind.
Yeah. We gotta go back a bit. Like, both Saban and Levy started.
We gotta go way back to the Saturn logo era. the weird ass Saturn logo that had text that looked like it was in the Pac-Man font. Saban did not get started in television production. It started out in music.
That said, for Haim Saban himself, and of course Levy, both were in the music industry before any kind of animation. What actually got Saban started in this field, it happened before Saban Entertainment. It happened before the 80s. It was the French adaptation of Grendizer, which was referred to as Goldrake or Goldrake, depending on the source you're looking at.
I suppose one of these days we'll have to delve into the weird and wonderful early adaptations of Go Nagai's work.
He has actually commented on Goldrake and Grendizer saying, it was a fun anime project, worth watching. It is not at all considered part of the actual franchise, so just a fun aside.
I think there was one early Mazinger attempt, not Shogun Warriors, that's a whole other story, that tried to have the mechs as knights in armor. I think it was attempted for like a very short-lived comic book. It didn't take. I look at it as one of those weird things where people were trying to take this newfangled anime thing and try and force it into things that they understood, and a lot of those things did not work. Because when you're in Rome, you do as the Romans do.
That said, it is worth noting this is kind of one of the earlier times of anime coming to France.
Yeah.
Saban was rather influential in this process.
Even from historians. There's a bit of underestimation on the influence that France had when it came to anime. both stuff coming into France and France influencing different mangaka and some animation directors. I'm pretty sure we may have hinted when we talked about Miyazaki that he's something of a francophone. And projects like Space Adventure Cobra and Captain Harlock have had and just Leiji Matsumoto's work in general have had such a long-standing history in France that French artists have worked on continuations. Some as recently as less than a decade ago.
It was after his kind of work there that he started to get some notice and eventually started making connections with the kind of US side of production. Somewhere along this line is when he met up with Shuki.
Shuki has his place in history. After the partnership ended, he didn't really stick around.
Yeah, he kind of just went back to doing musical stuff.
And then he just disappeared.
To be fair, I think if I remember right, he was a few years older than Haim. So by the point he disappeared, I think he was kind of just getting old. It was like, I think it's a good time to clock out. He made his impact. I know he had a number of hit songs down in Italy, I believe.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think. It was Italy Shuki was from, correct?
I believe so. I barely keep up with when it came to the history of hit songs in the States, let alone in Europe.
I just ended up needing to look into Shuki a bit when I realized, oh god, I need to look into more of Haim's history prior to Saban Entertainment. So beyond Saban, his mark isn't really going to be relevant to our discussion. Worth mentioning, though, I think.
Worth mentioning in the sense that there's always surprise elements when you're trying to be a wannabe historian.
Yeah.
Which we definitely are.
But yeah, it was after that, though, when they got together. They did a few other small projects before the official forming of Saban Entertainment. Nothing major that I could really dig too much up on. But then they formed Saban Entertainment together.
Originally, it was Saban Productions, and that's where we have the weird ass Saturn logo.
I think the first notable thing Saban did, it was also in France.
They had a partnership with Deke, who, if you grew up watching animation in the 90s, you should be familiar with Deke and some of the screw-ups that they did in terms of dubbing. They had early relationships, as far as music, they had early relationships with Filmation, of all people. Their first production is infamous because it was Kid Video. That was a co-production with Deke.
We'll briefly get to that, because that was 84, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, believe me, it took every part of me to not open this episode. And today, me and the monk take you to the flip side. We will get to that in a moment.
So, I have seen clips and a couple episodes of Kid Video. Old ass VHS re-recordings, so quality is complete ass. But visually and sonically, it is probably the worst Saturday morning cartoon that came out of the 80s. As much as people want to glaze a lot of the pioneers within 1980s cartoons, everyone wants to memory hole the bad ones, and this is one of them.
I encourage everyone to go listen to the opening of that video to radio. Mm-hmm. It is gloriously god-awful 80s cheese.
Not in the fun kind of cheese. I
loved it. It was hilarious. It wasn't supposed to be hilarious, but it was.
This was also around that time where there was this weird experimenting with trying to do live action and 2D integration, or sometimes do them separately in same episodes. You saw it throughout the 80s and a little bit of the 90s. I don't miss it.
Yeah. But that's the thing they did before that I think is really worth bringing up. It was a production between Japanese and French studios called The Mysterious Cities of Gold. Or Esteban, Child of the Sun. Couple different names, I think, depending on the season and where. I think this might have been like the first real success out of Saban, even if it wasn't here in the States that a lot of people know it for.
There was also a few years into the 80s, and then later on in the 90s, their first lawsuit would probably end up killing off their I won't say killing off, but certainly damaged their relationship with Deke. They bought some of the programming rights, specifically the foreign rights to their library, and then sold the rights to C&D, or and I'm going to apologize for butchering French. Créativité et développement, or creativity and development, who are a story in and of themselves that I am not going to go into. And in fact, at one point they were a subsidiary of Saban. There was a lot of rearranging deck chairs around this time. Deke sued Saban over damages. They didn't reach a settlement until '91. And at the same time, even despite those suits, Deke was still co-producing with them. Saban was handling the international side of things.
I'm wondering if that's like a situation with Meatloaf and Jim Stein. They sued each other so much, but didn't even realize it. A famous story was an interviewer seeing the two of them eating lunch together, walking up and going, "Aren't you guys in a lawsuit right now?" And Meatloaf turning to Stein and saying, "Are you suing me?" Uh-uh. Like, just let our lawyers handle that shit. We don't care.
It very well could have been. I don't think this was, say, Gaiman versus McFarlane, which took the better part of 20 years to settle. But they didn't start going into live action until '87. The plan was to have a bunch of television partnerships with NBC and CBS, a made-for-TV film for NBC, a late-night series for TBS, a syndication strip, and a film for CBS. There were a lot of pilots that were pitched. None of them came to be.
But as stated, though, that Golden City, very important for anime down in France at the time. And it was shortly after that we had kind of another really... This might lead into a topic for a future episode, who knows. Mm-hmm. But they were responsible for Macron. For those who don't know about this weird trend back in the day, there was a couple studios who would take a bunch of different anime and chop them together.
The kind of Frankensteining that gave us Robotech.
It's a thing, like, it didn't happen too much stateside, but one day there's a bunch of Korean studios that just started doing this with a bunch of shows. But you can start that was a trend that started back with, like, Voltron, Macron 1, Robotech. I think Voltron was the first. It's hard to say.
Well, with Voltron and Macross, they just Frankenstein multiple different uninvolved anime back to back. I don't think there was a case of chopping up individual episodes to try and make this kind of thing. And once again, when you're dealing with history, things get weird, and it's hard to tell where the line from one to the other is.
But yeah, Macron became somewhat interesting for when they released it here stateside with that weird meshing of a bunch of stuff together. They also put in a bunch of pop songs that were popular. You can find some videos in it. They did not even try to match the music to some of those scenes.
Probably because whoever was editing the video part of it didn't even know.
And even if so, like, how are you going to just slam Journey over... I don't think they actually used Journey. They might have.
Then again, this is the same production company that decided to use Electric Avenue and forgot that that song is about a riot.
Yeah, I don't think Saban cared. I think they just wanted the popular music to grab attention.
The mindset back then, much like it is now, was put something on the airways.
But yeah, I believe it's after this we actually get to Kid Video.
Although it is kind of funny that at one point they had worked with John Langley for a quarterly special. The reason that's funny is John Langley would become the creator/producer of Cops. There was also the fact that at the end of the 80s, they were able to syndicate the film library of New World Pictures. A lot of it which was sold to Transatlantic Entertainment, which was consisting of ex-New World people. And if I had enough alcohol in my system, I would go into more detail on New World Pictures because you cannot talk about New World Pictures without talking about Roger Corman. In the interest of time, I will say Roger Corman was responsible for giving a lot of people their big break, but he was also embarrassingly cheap. And because of that, there's a long list of people who really don't like him.
We won't talk about too much more of like the big 80s stuff because a lot of what Saban Entertainment were doing was the music production side of things. They did do the stuff like, again, the Macron one and such that they helped bring over. But they were doing like a lot of music work. You can thank them for the Inspector Gadget theme for one. God, what else was there? He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Mask, Ghostbusters.
I think a lot of that was just because they had working relationships with Deke and Filmation.
Yeah, so even if you didn't really see their name attached on the forefront back then, they were present for a lot of the 80s.
Yeah. The tricky thing with trying to establish a timeline is that there's a lot of divisions and renames and rebrands that happened just in the span of 10 years.
Yeah.
I wasn't around to see it, but I remember they were indirectly involved with the video power experiment, which was one of those early attempts to try and do this newfangled video gaming thing onto television. This kind of thing didn't last all that long in the US, but it really took off in the UK. And video power was the product of Acclaim. You know, Acclaim is infamous in their own right, especially now that they're back. Yeah, that's the sentence I didn't think I'd say. Acclaim has come back from the dead.
With Jeff Jarrett as one of funders for it, or investors, which is just a weird thing to say.
If I ever meet him, that's the question I'm going to ask about. Not about the guitars, not about the country singer gimmick. No, I'm going to ask him about that.
Yeah, I think the next time we actually see like Saban really start to get their name known, it's going to be 89, where you can basically thank them for the American Dragon Ball Z theme.
Yeah, it is funny going back and looking at how Saban and Ocean Group dubs scored the episodes, especially the movies, where they decided to sneak in Pantera because they could. In the last few years, there's been more and more of an effort to use the original audio. It's one of those things where I have a love-hate relationship with that until I learned that it's replacing that I didn't know who Kagayama was back then. Now I do. I'm like, you're replacing the theme that got him so popular it became his nickname for the longest time. I would say they were kind of floating around for a large amount of the 80s and even the early 90s until about 1992. Now this is a year before Power Rangers, but 1992 they enter a partnership with Marvel, and that's how we get the X-Men cartoon, and basically go in a full blitz with the Fox Kids experiment. Now Marvel was in a weird spot right around now because when we get to the early to mid 90s, we were in the early signs of the speculator bubble, and in a few years, Toy Biz would be taking over Marvel, and that's a complicated subject for another day that Chuck Sonnenberg has gone into. I will simply say it was a 5-front legal fight during Marvel's bankruptcy.
Now, if I recall right, for the Fox Kids and stuff they did with Marvel, they were still largely just on the musical end. Or is this when they started doing a bit more of the... Oh, they were the actual
producing.
Oh, okay. That is when they stepped into it.
Like, by the time we get to the late 80s, they were already doing different productions and co-productions. They had started moving into production outright in 84. But there was almost a bit of double dealing going on because they had partnerships with both Fox and Paramount. Because in 94 they did a joint venture with UPN, essentially to establish a kids animation block, much like they did with Fox. That was where we got our first attempt at adapting Tekkaman Blade with Technoman.
I couldn't make it through the first 2 episodes. Like, this is something I picked up ages ago, just when it came out with a collection. I'm like, hey, let's see what this is. They make so many seafood-based puns about the aliens. And they repeat the puns. And it's another one where it's a different episode count.
Mhm.
from the original. So I'm like, this, no.
So the original has its own brand of infamy because of that was Morikawa's first role, and he was infamous for breaking two microphones. Sometimes directors will tell voice actors you need to amp it up, or they feel like you're not giving them enough energy. Morikawa listened.
Just before Techno Man came out, there's another anime they brought over, one we brought up multiple times in the past on this show, Samurai Pizza Cats, in 1990.
Oh yes, the greatest accident ever.
See, it might not necessarily have been an accident. There's a couple different versions of how the story went. The ones I think we've said before on this show and that I've read before, it's that the whole script never arrived in time. There's another version. They didn't have the script at all. And they sold the rights not having the script because they just lost it and didn't care.
But the Japanese studio didn't have the script in the first place. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they sold it not having the script to send at all. I don't know which rendition is true, but I kind of like that one because it's funnier. Like, oh yeah, we're just gonna sell the rights to this. Well, can we get the script? No. Why not? We don't know where we put it.
I know it might be tempting to say, oh, how could they have not known where it was? Let me bring up a couple things that show there's precedent for this. Konami hired a studio to do an HD collection for Silent Hill, and then after they inked the deal and sent out the contract, they realized, oh shit, we've lost all the source code for the games.
See also Sega getting the source code for one of the Sonic games from a random Redditor who had it for some reason, but Sega didn't.
Or, if I really want to twist the knife, I could bring up all of the missing episodes of Doctor Who that are still missing and have been missing for about 50 years, despite lengthy attempts to try and recover them.
But yeah, point in case, what we got for Samurai Pizza Cats is probably nothing like what Samurai Pizza Cats was supposed to be. And it's not really the fault of the studio who brought it over. Mind you, they are a studio who have chopped up stuff before, but in this case, it wasn't their fault.
Not to mention, since we are going to have to bring up Power Rangers, I'll bring up this minor story. Are you familiar with the communications fuck-up that happened with Power Rangers in space?
I know it happened. I don't remember exactly what it was, though.
Saban was told that the next season that they would get was very space themed, and so they built the ending to Turbo around that. The series that they were going to be using next, Mega Ranger, was not space themed; it was device themed. And by the time they realized that, they had already set it up to be, they'd already called the next season Power Rangers in Space.
Why am I not surprised?
So they're like, fuck it, we're not going to be doing another season after this. Let's just make the space stuff ourselves. It's going to look like shit, but we'll have it.
But yeah, Power Rangers up next. That's definitely the thing they're probably most known for.
I will note a bit of a story. So a few years ago, I talked to somebody who's been a producer for Sega of America and Bandai of America. She was there when Power Rangers was pitched. Even back then, a lot of producers didn't have much faith in it. Apparently, doing Power Rangers was something that was pitched all the way back in the late 80s, but it kept getting rejected. I think the only reason it was able to pass the muster this time around was because Fox was trying everything they could to compete. They were like, give us anything you got that Disney has not taken, we'll take it. Especially since this was, 90s Disney where they were basically dominating the Saturday morning block.
90s Disney was dominating a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. And then dominating other mediums through the subsidiary they had, Touchstone Pictures, which Touchstone Pictures was there solely to produce movies that didn't have to have the family-friendly stigma that a Disney project would have. They didn't do anything R-rated, obviously, but they certainly did But since there were a lot of films that were using the brand new PG-13 rating,
For anyone who isn't familiar with the history of what Power Rangers actually is, they took a bunch of Super Sentai stuff from Japan and cut in live action stuff filmed here in America. So it's like a weird hybrid of an original show from Japan and American scenes filmed to air it here. I do feel most people are probably aware of that by this point, but
yeah, through all the parodies and the like, people are going to have some level of awareness on that front. What I find amusing, as a fan of both, is the series they used for their first entry when it came to Power Rangers. That being Zeo Ranger. Now, the reason this is funny to me is because Zeo Ranger is not good. Not only is it not good, it has some of the more infamous, annoying kid character problems. And the funniest part about all of it is Toei had no faith in the idea of a sixth Ranger, to the point where they didn't even put Burai in the opening credits. They thought the thing would just be a one-off and it wouldn't stick. Boy, were they wrong. One of the big mysteries for the longest time was why there was the cast change a little ways into the second season. The reason being is, as you're going to hear a lot, Haim Saban is cheap. Some of the actors from that era have spoken on the matter, and it basically comes down to they were confused about why the budget was going down for the second season, despite how successful they were with that first season. The plan was to present a request for more with a unified front, but the front wasn't all that unified. Kind of reminds me of the whole PDA thing back in the 60s. But it really came down to they had felt that with the success that they had built, that they had earned a bigger paycheck coming back, which, is pretty standard. You try and bring somebody back after a successful first film, they're going to ask for a bigger cut. Even in professional sports, there's the thing called the championship tax of, yeah, congratulations, you won a championship. Now everybody wants to get paid more. I'm not meaning this in some kind of negative. I mean, get that bag if you want to get that bag. But Haim wasn't willing to budge. And because he wasn't willing to budge, the inevitable happened. And him not being willing to budge would become a recurring problem. I would not be surprised if it was a problem even in his early years. I think that was probably the thing. He survived the early years by being cheap, and he never let go of that cheapness when he didn't have to.
It's hard to really say that bit him, though, because things were still going good for the guy in Saban Entertainment. He may have made a lot of people very unhappy, but it did not seem to slow him down in the slightest.
Not yet. Even with Power Rangers' success, he was still doing stuff with animation. The big thing, and the thing that ended up outlasting him, was Digimon.
Oh man, I loved Digimon back in the day.
I think Saban handled Adventure 1, 2, and Tamers, and only about half of Frontier.
Said, I would say Digimon is probably the last real Saban Entertainment project, because it's around Tamers, it got sold to Disney.
And Disney originally was just going to put Power Rangers in syndication hell. But the thing that stopped it was a procedural error with one of their subsidiaries, Jetix Europe. We're like, nope, part of the deal is we need more of Power Rangers. And originally they weren't going to do it until it was pitched, let's move the production to New Zealand to cut costs. I believe the last Saban-produced Power Rangers project was Wild Force. Actually, I think Wild Force was that transitional one.
It was created and pre-produced by them. I think Saban still occasionally worked with them for Power Rangers throughout the years, even if he himself didn't have the say he used to.
Well, you know how I said that there was a bunch of name changes and rebrands? That would continue even through that era, because shortly after the purchase by Disney, they ended up forming
Buena Vista Studios. I think is how you
BVS Entertainment was what it was called. I should clarify, when they were sold off, it wasn't that they were sold off specifically. It was a package deal as part of a lot of the Fox Kids library. And yeah, they were rebranded as Buena Vista Studios Entertainment. And I do have to correct myself. The last thing that they were fully involved in was Time Force. Wild Force, yeah, pre-production. And Saban subsidiaries would rebrand just as much.
At this point, I'll note there's a difference between us talking about this studio compared to a lot of the other studios we've talked about in the past.
Mhm.
Saban Entertainment was not doing bad at this point. They were a very successful company still, and it got sold for a crap ton of money, along with Fox. So they
And
didn't like peter out and die or fade into obscurity. They just won. I don't know how else to put that. They went out on a high note.
there was also the fact that Fox was not exactly known for making smart decisions even back then. And I do have to correct myself. The second half of Tamers and all of Frontier, that was handled post acquisition. But some say Disney was as hands off as humanly possible when it came to Saban properties, but in other cases, especially given some of the weird demands that were made, I think Disney was salty about the fact that they had to keep making more of it.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Things like telling JDF to stop swearing, even though he wasn't, or just some very odd things. And then, in the early 2010s, Saban comes back out of nowhere and reacquires Power Rangers after RPM. This is where we get the Neo Saban era, and I feel like this particular era is where a lot of the karma that Haim Saban had built up started to come back to bite him. Now, putting aside the fact that he was working with a complete lead with Paramount vis-a-vis Nickelodeon at this point, Nickelodeon are just as cheapskate as he is. That's how they survived the 80s when they were trying to compete with PBS. Yeah, Nickelodeon came into their own in the 90s, but they started in the 80s. That was how a lot of people first saw a very young Keanu Reeves because they were grabbing stuff from Canadian television. Haim was trying desperately to replicate the success from the mid 90s. And it was very clear that the the expectations from audiences had changed so much, and he wasn't willing to adapt. I did a whole postmortem on his run. I think the issue was he was living in the past. It was like George South trying to live in the early 80s and thinking, oh, we're going to be doing a show in Texas. We need to get Mil Mascaras in this. The way television writing for all ages and production had changed so much since he was in the game, and he was bringing in a lot of the older guard who instead of realizing, oh, we need to bring in some new blood. During the tail end of that run, he brought in Judd Lynn, who, yeah, Lynn was the guy who wrote the blueprint on how to do a Power Rangers season. There's no doubt about that. His record speaks for itself. But when you put him in, you have him try and replicate what came before as close as possible. You're not going to get good results out of that. And
That said, while his return to Power Rangers and whatnot it may not have gone so great, I don't think he's really all that sad about how his career went post Saban Entertainment. Because that's the first time he kind of showed back up here. I forget the name of the German television company. It was about to go bankrupt in 2003. He got involved with it, turned it around, and then sold it for a crap ton of money. There was a
yeah,
music production company he got involved with, turned it around, sold it for a lot of money. It's like there's a pattern here where he'll hit a high point with a company and go, I'm getting rid of this before things go south. And then walks away with a huge bag of cash.
however, I doubt even with those successes that he will be trying to venture back into television production anytime soon.
Well, yeah, the guy's 81 now. I think he's
Oh,
kind of done.
there's certainly that. I don't think I'd see him doing the Walk of Fame at the Golden Globes or something like that.
Yeah.
Might do the equivalent out in Europe, or I could see him sitting in the stands during Eurovision. As an aside, I brainstormed the idea of a 50 states version of Eurovision at one point, and then I realized how terrible of an idea that is. But it's despite me taking, I mainly take pot shots at that Neo Saban era because when it started, a lot of people acted like it was the return to the good old days.
I mean, I'm not gonna say it was horrible. I've never been huge on Power Rangers,
I am,
but
and I will say it.
like it's. I remember seeing something like it's. I mean, it's Western Power Rangers. I don't think it's terrible, but it's certainly not good.
Like I said, the big problem was it was trying to imagine an old band coming back together, but pretty much everybody is completely out of step, but they're still trying to act like it's 1992.
I don't entirely know if the concept of even how Power Rangers was done with just we're gonna use your giant mech fights and monsters, and we're just going to cut in our guys acting.
Well, there's also the fact that by that point in time, Toei had far more leverage. And yet, if some of the rumors that I've heard are true, when it got sold off to Hasbro, he found ways to screw them on the way out with some bizarre ass mandates. Supposedly, he tried to push for a no evil Rangers mandate, despite the fact that that was part of the some of the greatest successes he had. I think there were a few other very odd things he tried to do as a middle finger on the way out, which I don't know why you'd want to do that.
Maybe it wasn't even a middle finger. Maybe he just thought that was a good idea. That is also possible.
Of course, in the years since, everybody thought nobody could kill the series, and then Hasbro did by their sheer incompetence. There's been plenty of others who have talked about it, but I think if there's anything we take away from Haim Saban's legacy and history, it's that he seemed to really like playing musical deck chairs with with the works that he oversaw. I think if you're looking at him as far as the television that he produced, you'd see a whole lot of mid and stumbling on a few hits. If you were to look at him as just a television producer, yeah, turning a bunch of stuff around that was on its way out certainly is part of that legacy.
He is a very confident businessman.
The thriftness that let him survive the early years can be something of a double-edged sword, because you can have these situations where you end up being too thrift for your own good, or because those tactics worked in the past, you think, oh, those tactics will work now, even if it's a completely different set of circumstances.
And in a lot of ways, I think a lot of what people are going to kind of remember him for aren't necessarily what his name was on. It's those music productions. Like, to this day, people love that X-Men theme.
I know they brought it back, and for that X-Men '97 project, I haven't seen much in the way of season 2, but one thing I know that they're doing is bringing in X-Force.
Also, we went this whole episode not even mentioning Big Bad Beetleborgs.
Or VR Troopers. Or Masked Rider. Although in the case of Masked Rider, I'd rather never mention that again.
Big Bad Beetleborgs being the other Power Rangers-esque show he tried to do like that.
If we're going to go that far, I may as well mention the one that didn't have any footage, that being Tir Nanog.
Never even seen that one.
I have. Surprisingly, it's never gotten a DVD release. I can't imagine why. In doing a bit of cursory research, I also found out that there were plans on doing, because it wasn't just X-Men that was part of that collaboration between him and Marvel. Obviously, there was Silver Surfer, though that didn't last. There was Iron Man, that did last, and has its legacy shown in the MCU because of the briefcase. Obviously, stuff like Fantastic Four and Hulk, but there were also plans on a Captain America animated series. The only reason that didn't happen was because of Marvel's bankruptcy, and the fact that to try and deal with the cost of the bankruptcy and the lengthy court battle, they sold off pretty much everything that wasn't nailed down as far as film and TV rights goes, which was why you saw a bunch of Marvel properties being given film treatments by different studios.
That said, overall, I think with Haim Saban, his influence on anime in France, I think, is kind of understated these days. At least around here, because, who here in America gives a shit about anime starting in France? But he was a big deal for that. And I think Saban Entertainment itself, it may have a lot of about it and some weird things, but between all of their music production and even just a handful of the classics they're responsible for, from Power Rangers to bringing over Digimon, it's hard to understate the influence Saban actually had.